The background to these offences, as we've heard, lies in violent criminal gang rivalry between those connected to the Woodchurch estate and others connected to the Ford estate on the Wirral. You, Chapman, were very actively involved in the Woodchurch gang, whilst you, Waring, were associated with it. The violence included shootings during 2021 and 2022 and created very substantial concern to the people of Merseyside. On the 23rd of December last year, one of your associates was attacked by Jake Duffy and Kieran Solkeld in the street. They were part of the Ford estate gang. And when you learned of that, you decided on revenge in premeditated and carefully planned murder of Jake Duffy and Kieran Solkeld. You used a stolen Mercedes A-Class car with false registration plates, which you often used for your drug dealing. You disguised yourself with dark clothing, a mask, a hood and gloves. You obtained a submachine gun and a loaded magazine with 12 bullets. When you left your home on the Woodchurch estate to carry out the shooting, you took care to avoid security cameras on neighbouring properties. Once you reached Wallasey Village, where you knew Jake Duffy and Kieran Solkeld were to be, you waited almost 3 hours, carrying out reconnaissance as you drove to 6 different positions until you reached the car park, close to the front door of the Lighthouse, where you hid inside your stolen car waiting for your moment. And then at 11:52, shortly before midnight, when the Lighthouse was full of people, and standing outside at the front was the group of 6, from a hidden position at the side of the building you burst forward to be as close as a few metres to fire the submachine gun. Elle Edwards was killed instantly. You hit 5 others with the bullets. All of them might easily have been killed also. As you ran back to the car, you fired the last few shots at the group and then drove away at speed to the safety, as you planned it, of Thomas Waring's home. I am satisfied that you asked Waring to look after the gun and that you asked him to help to destroy the stolen Mercedes 6 days later. As the jury have found, you, Waring, knew that Chapman had carried out the shooting and that he had murdered Elle Edwards when you agreed to help in the disposing of the car. You also knew that the police wanted to arrest Chapman. The murder of Elle Edwards has caused profound and permanent grief to her family and a great shock to the entire community. She was a very much loved young woman in her prime, killed by you, Chapman, when you were prepared to kill anyone in your determination for gang revenge. This court has heard exceptionally moving statements from Elle Edwards' family by her father, her brother, her grandmother, and they will never be able to come to terms with what happened to Ellie. The seriousness of this offence of murder, count 1, is very substantially aggravated by the following evidence. The choice of weapon, which was exceptionally dangerous. The location of the offence, with many people present on Christmas Eve. The background of criminal gang violence. The substantial preparation and premeditation. The removal or destruction of important evidence, including the car, phones and clothing, as well as the washing of clothes. The fact that you were the subject of criminal gang injunctions and, as you told the jury, you were dealing in Class A drugs. Apart from your age at the time of offending, being 22, you're now 23, there is no significant mitigation. Whilst young age can be significant, in the circumstances of your offending, Chapman, it carries little weight. I must sentence you, Connor Chapman, not just for this very serious offence of murder, but also for the 2 offences of attempted murder, counts 2 and 3, 2 offences of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, counts 4 and 5, an assault occasioning actual bodily harm, count 6, and possessing firearm together with possessing ammunition, both with intent to endanger life, counts 7 and 8. I must also sentence you for an offence of handling stolen goods, which concerns the stolen Mercedes A-Class. For reasons that will become clear, I will pass concurrent sentences on all of these offences, but the seriousness of all your offending will be reflected in the sentence I impose on count 1, murder. The sentence for murder is imprisonment for life. I have to decide whether that should be a whole life or a minimum term which you'll have to serve. The difference is whether your offending is so exceptionally serious in the context of the gravest of murder offences that you should serve the whole of your life in custody rather than a very long term. Whilst I'm sure that there are some who would readily consider that a whole life term should be imposed, I have concluded that your offending is on the cusp between a whole life and a very long minimum term. And in the circumstances, I cannot conclude that a whole life term, as a sentence of last resort for the very gravest of murders, must be imposed. The starting point in fixing the minimum term, which is the period that you must serve in custody before you might seek to be released, is 30 years on count one. I must increase that term, firstly to reflect the factors which increase its seriousness, and secondly to reflect the other offences, including 2 offences of attempted murder. I take into account also, to the limited extent that it provides any mitigation, your age. Accordingly, I increase the minimum term to firstly 36 years and secondly up to 48 years, which reflects your total offending. So that it's understood by you, Connor Chapman, as well as those who are observing. It means that you will have to serve 48 years in custody before you could apply for release. And if you're ever released, and considering your dangerousness, that might never happen, you will be on licence for the rest of your life and subject to recall to prison if you breach the terms of that licence. I must also impose the sentences to be served at the same time as your sentence on count 1. On counts 2 and 3 being for attempted murder, I'm satisfied that each of those offences require separate sentences of imprisonment for life under Section 285 of the Sentencing Act 2020. Therefore, a Schedule 19 offence, and you are a dangerous offender, given the circumstances of these attempted murder offences and the murder of Elle Edwards. They fall within Category A2 under the guideline with a starting point of 30 years, which I increase on each to 33 years to reflect the aggravating factors I have identified in count 1. There is little by way of mitigation. I must then fix a minimum term, which I set at 22 years. Accordingly, the sentences for counts 2 and 3 are concurrent sentences of imprisonment for life with a minimum term of 22 years. This means that you will have to serve 3 life sentences concurrently. On counts 4 and 5, Section 18 wounding with intent, they fall within Category A3 of the guideline. Adjusting the starting point to reflect aggravating and mitigating factors, I impose 7 years imprisonment concurrently. On count 6, Section 47 assault, which falls within Category A3, I impose 18 months concurrently. On count 7 and 8, offences of possessing a firearm and of possessing its ammunition, both being Category 1A offences under the guideline, I impose 15 years imprisonment concurrently with each other and all other sentences. Handling stolen goods, I impose 3 years imprisonment concurrently as a Category 2A offence. Connor Chapman, stand up. I sentence you as follows. On count 1 to imprisonment for life with a minimum term to serve in custody of 48 years, less 176 days served on remand. On counts 2 and 3, concurrent sentences of imprisonment for life under Section 285 of the Sentencing Act 2020 with a minimum term of 22 years. On counts 4 and 5, concurrent sentences of 7 years imprisonment. On count 6, a concurrent sentence of 18 months imprisonment. On count 7 and 8, a concurrent sentence of 15 years. And for the offence of handling stolen goods, a concurrent sentence of 3 years imprisonment. He can go down.
Well, let's leave Liverpool Crown Court there, where we were hearing the judge's sentencing of Connor Chapman for the murder of Elle Edwards that took place on Christmas Eve of last year. The sentencing from the judge was 3 life sentences to be served concurrently, with a minimum term of 48 years before Connor Chapman can apply for release. He will, if he does ever get released, be on licence for the rest of his life. Connor Chapman was being sentenced for 8 different counts. We are now going to take you back to Liverpool Crown Court, where Connor Chapman's accomplice is being sentenced.
A short time after the shooting, you agreed to look after the submachine gun until it was later taken away, as undoubtedly it was, and has not been recovered by the police. That firearm was a prohibited firearm because of its rapid fire facility, and was a Type 1 firearm under the guideline. I accept that this offence falls within Category 3A, and that the starting point for sentence is 6 years, with a statutory minimum sentence of 5 years custody. I see no reason to avoid that minimum term. Your previous convictions do not significantly aggravate the offence seriousness, and taking into account your age, therefore, I reduce the sentence to 5 years from the starting point in respect of Count 9. For the offence of assisting an offender, Count 10, I am satisfied that the offending by Chapman was very grave, which you knew. I am also satisfied that your assistance was important and that it significantly damaged the interests of justice because it was the car used to carry out the shooting. Accordingly, your culpability was high and the harm caused was at least medium, set against the maximum sentence of 10 years under the Criminal Law Act 1967. There is no sentence guideline for this offence, but the appropriate sentence before taking into account your age is 6 years, which I reduced to 5 years for your youth. And it's necessary for your offences to be served consecutively, that's to say one after the other, because they are clear and separate acts, one to possess the firearm and the other to help to destroy the car. However, I will reduce your total sentence under the totality principle to 9 years. I impose concurrent sentence of 12 months custody for the offence under Section 49, having taken into account your late guilty plea. Stand up, Thomas Waring. I sentence you to 5 years custody on Count 9 and 4 years custody on Count 10 to be served consecutively, a total sentence of 9 years. I impose a concurrent sentence of 12 months for the Section 49 offence. You will serve half of that sentence, less 92 days on remand. He can go down.
All right, well, we heard there from Liverpool Crown Court the sentencing just now of Thomas Waring, the accomplice of Connor Chapman, who was sentenced just now for the murder of Elle Edwards. Thomas Waring there, we heard, sentenced to 9 years in custody. That was 10 years with 12 months removed from it for his youth. Connor Chapman, who you can see on your screen now, was sentenced to 3 life sentences concurrently. That means that he will spend 48 years in prison before he can apply for a release. It's a life sentence with a 48-year minimum term. If he is released, he will spend the rest of his life on licence, which means that he could be recalled to prison at any time. Well, we heard there from the judge in his remarks that Connor Chapman, he deemed a highly dangerous man who had carefully planned the murder of what he thought was 2 gang rivals, but with no thought for the people who would have been at the pub on Christmas Eve of last year. The judge went through how Connor Chapman spent days removing and destroying evidence after the event. He did give the context of this shooting with a submachine gun, the context being gang rivalry between 2 estates in the Merseyside area, Chapman belonging to the Woodchurch gang, the Woodchurch estate gang, and this being an attempted revenge killing on 2 gang members from the Ford estate. The context, the backdrop of this in Merseyside shootings throughout 2021 and 2022, and the judge painted a picture of a community that was already living in fear. At 11:52, the judge said Connor Chapman rushed forward, opened fire. There was a group of 6 people outside the pub that was on the Wirral there, the Lighthouse Inn in Wallasey. He opened fire. Elle Edwards was killed instantly. Others were injured. The judge said that Connor Chapman was the subject of gang injunctions, that he'd already said that he dealt in drugs. He was 22 years at the time of the offence, but that's his youth not enough to be taken into account and to reduce the sentences. Connor Chapman was there for 8. He was being sentenced for 8 counts. First, of course, the conviction of Elle Edwards' murder, but 7 other counts. Those other counts, 2 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, and 1 count of assault occasioning actual bodily harm, as well as possession of a Skorpion submachine gun with intent to endanger life, and possession of ammunition with intent to endanger life. So, as we heard there, the judge saying that the killer of Elle Edwards will spend 48 years in prison before he can apply for any sort of release. He will spend the rest of his life, even if he does get released, on a licence. His accomplice, Thomas Waring, whose house Chapman fled to after the shooting and who helped Chapman to destroy the Mercedes that he'd used to flee the scene after the killing, was sentenced to 9 years in total for the possession of a prohibited firearm and for assisting an offender. Those 2 sentences, 5 years each, to be served consecutively rather than concurrently, and with 12 months removed for his youth, his young age. To remind you, of course, this was a murder that took place Christmas Eve of last year. Elle Edwards, a beautician, 26 years old, who'd been on a night out on that Christmas Eve in the Lighthouse Inn in Wallasey on the Wirral. She had been with friends, and of course she never returned from that night out. So we heard earlier a victim impact statement from her father, where he spoke about the Christmases that he will never have, the celebrations that he will never have, the fact that Christmas Eve will not be something that his family celebrates ever again, the effect on the family's mental health that the death of his daughter has had. And it was telling that the mother of Elle Edwards did not appear in court today to listen to that sentencing of her daughter's murderer. A murder, of course, that was, in a sense, one could call it a byproduct of gang warfare. Well, Sky's correspondent Inzamam Rashid has been at Liverpool Crown Court this afternoon. And Inzamam, just tell us what it was like in court today.
Incredibly emotional, particularly when you start with those victim impact statements read out by the lawyers on behalf of the family, but also when Connor Chapman was given his minimum sentence of 48 years. That's how long he will spend behind bars before he can apply to be released. 48 years was probably one of the largest sentences you can get in a whole life term. He was, of course, yesterday found guilty for the murder of Elle Edwards, amongst other counts as well. And for that murder charge, he has been given a total of 48 years minimum in prison. A 23-year-old man. He will be 71 when he can apply to be released from prison. We go back and look at this case. This was a brutal murder. It was a shooting that happened just 10 minutes before Christmas Day outside what was an incredibly busy pub on Christmas Eve. It was packed with people, young people, the age of Elle Edwards, who was just 26 years old. She had come out into the beer garden for a smoke, and it was her who took 2 bullets to the back of the head, which were completely unsurvivable. There were 5 other men injured that night as well. And the gunman, Connor Chapman, had arrived in Wallasey 3 hours before at around 9 o'clock in the evening. He essentially did a recce of the area, and then about 55 minutes before he fired his gun, he waited in a car parking spot to look for his 2 targets. Those who were essentially criminal gang members of the opposite estate. He was looking out for Kieran Selkeld and Jake Duffy, and they were his intended targets. He did manage to seriously injure them. However, there was nothing that was stopping him firing 12 rounds into a crowd of people, and it was Elle Edwards who got into in the way. He was a wholly innocent bystander, and took 2 bullets to the back of the head. It would just give you a bit of information of what was happening inside court when those verdicts, the sentencing was given out by the judge. When he said it was 48 years, reflects your total offending. Tim Edwards, Elle Edwards' father, looked directly at Connor Chapman and said goodbye to him when those sentences were read out. There was also cheers from the public gallery as well. As you can imagine, the family who've been sat through 3.5 weeks of this trial, reliving CCTV footage, reliving moments leading up to Elle Edwards' death, they were incredibly happy. But throughout the whole time that this sentencing was going on, through the victim impact statements, there was a lot of tears inside court, a lot of tissues used, because some of those impact statements were incredibly heartbreaking. One from Tim Edwards, Elle Edwards' father, one from her older brother, and one from her grandma as well. And all the time, Tim Edwards looking directly at Connor Chapman, trying to make eye contact with the man that murdered his daughter. If I read you, if you don't mind, some of the notes from those victim impact statements, Tim Edwards saying that Elle was the most beautiful, the most kind, the most caring person you could ever ask for. He spoke about how the events of Christmas Eve has impacted the family in a whole number of ways. He says the feeling of hopelessness, he can't put that into words. He said this has impacted him and his wife Gaynor for the rest of their lives. We are expecting shortly for the family to come out, the police as well, Merseyside police, to say a few words. He said that I will do my very best to make sure her name, Elle Marlene Edwards, is never forgotten. He said Christmas will never be celebrated by myself. Gone is the time of all of us being together, because we will never all be together. Connor Edwards, Ellie's brother, also saying that we loved each other growing up. As teenagers, we were born into a big, loving family, which had so many lovely memories. And he spoke about the moment he found out that it was his sister who was shot dead at the Lighthouse Inn on Christmas Eve. He said, I felt numb and traumatized. The days that followed were horrific. Visiting my sister, lying in the mortuary, seeing a patch above her right eye. I will never forget that picture. We never missed a Christmas together. The fact that this happened at that time is utterly horrendous. He says, we've lost everything. We have to carry on as best as we can. I love you and I'll miss you, and I'll cherish the 26 years we had together. And a quick note as well from Ellie's grandma, who Elle would often call her queen. Her grandma would call her princess. She said, if I were to die tomorrow, the coroner would write the cause of death, died of a broken heart. I miss my princess so much. It was then the defence gave their mitigations, very, very little mitigation, it has to be said. There wasn't much support from the defence. They said that their biggest mitigation was the fact that Connor Chapman was 20, carried out his attack. He's 23 now, and so a whole life forward would mean he would be a very, very old man when he is released from prison. The judge then summed up saying that your intention was to murder that night. He said that he is satisfied that you're a highly dangerous man. We've all watched the CCTV and sound recording of that shooting. You had no thought at all of no one else, at least all to innocent people. He looked directly at Conor Chapman and said, you didn't care. Conor Chapman was then given a 48-year sentence, a whole life sentence with a minimum of 48 years by the judge. I think we can see Merseyside police shortly coming out along with the family as well. We'll hear exactly what it is that they've got to say very shortly. Also, Thomas Waring, his co-defendant, was sentenced today. Thomas Waring found guilty of 2 charges yesterday. That was possessing a firearm. The gun that Conor Chapman used that night was in Thomas Waring's house after the shooting. And also, Thomas Waring had helped Conor Chapman burn out the A-Class Mercedes, a stolen car that was used that evening to carry out his attack. So Thomas Waring also sentenced this evening. If I just go this afternoon, if I just go through the list of what it was specifically that Conor Chapman received from the judge this afternoon. On count 1 of murder, it was a minimum of 48 years. On count 2 and 3, these were concurrent life sentences with a minimum of 23 years, and these were attempted murder on those 2 intended targets, Jake Duffy and Kieran Selkeld. There were also other counts in this trial as well, and for that he has received other concurrent sentences. But of course it is that big one, and I think from memory one of the largest sentences for murder in this country. Of course, many remember what happened in this city also last year to a little girl, Olivia Pratt-Corbell, who was shot by Thomas Cashman. He received a sentence of 42 years. The judge has gone 6 years above that for this sentence. Conor Chapman receiving a minimum sentence of 48 years. As I said, we are expecting Elle Edwards' is incredibly emotional but also very happy family now to come out and say a few words. We are also expecting to hear from the senior investigating officer. I'm just looking over at the police. Yes, we'll hear from the senior investigating officer in this case as well, a case which brought a lot of CCTV to the table, and it was that played a crucial role throughout this trial. CCTV of not only the moment of the shooting where Conor Chapman fired 12 bullets into the crowd of people at the pub, but also CCTV of the man ruffling his long hair, dropping the Skorpion machine gun as he walked to his friend's house. CCTV and DNA recovered as well of red gloves that he wore whilst he carried out his attack, covered in Conor Chapman's DNA, a bullet casing which was also covered in his DNA found at the murder scene. Essentially, for the jury who came back within 3 hours yesterday, the evidence was incredibly overwhelming to convict Conor Chapman of murder. But that is the news from Liverpool Crown Court.
So much, Ashna, there in Wimbledon. We're going to take you back to Liverpool Crown Court, where the family of Elle Edwards are about to speak after the sentencing of her murderer.
Conor Chapman has today been jailed for life for the senseless and tragic murder of Elle Edwards in Wirral on Christmas Eve last year. Elle was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her who was simply enjoying a night out in a pub with her family and friends. The cowardly actions of Chapman on that night, firing at his intended targets whilst they were stood outside in a crowd, shows the arrogance and contempt that he had for everybody else. As a result of his reckless actions, Elle had her life tragically cut short. Her family and friends and everyone who knew her have been left devastated by their loss. Today, Chapman is behind bars where he rightly belongs and where he will now spend a considerable period of his adult life. His co-accused, Thomas Waring, has also been brought to justice. No sentence, however long, can change what Chapman did, but I hope that knowing he has been brought to justice and is off our streets brings some small amount of comfort. I hope that it serves as a deterrent to anybody considering picking up or using a gun. I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to Ellie's family, who throughout the whole investigation and the trial have remained dignified and composed despite being forced to relive the horrific events of Christmas Eve. And I hope that they can now start to properly grieve their loss. I would like to thank the Crown Prosecution Service, Adam Clark, and then in particular Nigel Powers, King's Counsel, and Katie Appleton for the successful prosecution of the case. I would also like to thank all officers and staff from across all strands of Merseyside Police who were involved in this case. From day one, their commitment, dedication and hard work has been key to the investigation and has allowed us to successfully prosecute Chapman and Wirral and get the justice for Ellie's family. Thank you.
I'd like to just echo what Paul said, really, that the amount of people involved in this investigation from day one, literally from the minute it happened, has been remarkable, and they did not give up. They were relentless in achieving the goal, which was to get justice for Ellie and catch the killer. Thankfully now he's got 48 years and hopefully he never sees Christmas again. If I'm lucky enough to still be around for a long time, yeah, I would do my best to make sure he never comes out of jail. And I know there's a lot of people who've been affected by this, and that includes the whole family behind me. And it needs to be, things need to change, and we've made a start with that. And I think the 48 years, if you think of picking up a gun now, you should think twice about it. And I'd like to thank, as again, Merseyside Police, the whole family behind me. We've sat here for 4 weeks and had to go through this, something that we'll never forget. But it was all done for Ellie, and we achieved that today. Thank you.
Well, we heard there from the father of Elle Edwards, Tim Edwards. Before him, the Detective Superintendent Paul Grounds, who was leading the investigation into the murder of Elle Edwards. Our correspondent, Inzamam Rashid, has been at Liverpool Crown Court all day and following the sentencing of Conor Chapman and his accomplice, Thomas Waring, over the murder of Elle Edwards. Inzamam, I hope you can hear me now, but we were, of course, waiting to hear from Elle Edwards' father. He's been outspoken over the last 24 hours. And what we heard there was perhaps, I guess, a look towards the future now, that things might be able to change, and this, a community reeling from the shock of Ellie's death, but also hoping that things in Merseyside might change.
Yeah, it was a much different tone from Tim Edwards, from what we've seen, particularly yesterday when Conor Chapman was found guilty of the murder of his daughter. He came out, he said that he hopes he rots in hell. He hopes that the two of them never see a single Christmas once again. He hopes that Conor Chapman is never ever released from prison. Today, a bit more subdued, I would say, and you're right, looking towards the future, reminding other criminals, not just here in Liverpool on Merseyside, but beyond as well, that if you decide to carry out such crimes, that is potentially the time you could serve. A minimum of 48 years is what Conor Chapman has received today for his murder of Elle Edwards, for the attempted murders of two others as well, those intended targets that he tried to kill that night on Christmas Eve, 10 minutes just before Christmas Day, in what was a very, very busy, packed pub, the Lighthouse Inn in Wallasey. It was busy with people who were obviously celebrating during the festive period, just enjoying themselves. And then a group of people, which included Elle Edwards, came out into the beer garden just 4 minutes before Connor Chapman, who'd been laying in wait for around 55 minutes with a clear, unobstructed view of the front entrance, creeped up to the building and fired 12 bullets into that crowd, what police called was indiscriminately, and 2 of those bullets ended up in the back of Elle Edwards' head. But just hearing then from Merseyside police as well, who have carried out this whole investigation, they've clearly said that they are hoping this case is a deterrent to criminals in the future. They hope that this sentence sets a precedent for gun crime going forward in this region. Last year, there were 5 fatal shootings across Merseyside, this being the last one on Christmas Eve. And Merseyside police have tried to work hard to ensure that they are working on gun crime in this region. And what they do hope is that Elle Edwards' story, Elle Edwards' sacrifice essentially, is something that can be taken forward and criminals will make sure that they think twice before pulling a trigger. But just a note on her father. Inside court, he was incredibly celebratory when Connor Chapman was given that 48-year sentence. He'd actually waved goodbye to Connor Chapman and said the words goodbye as he was handed that sentence. And then when the judge told Connor Chapman that he could go down, there were shouts of scumbag from the gallery. There were shouts of goodbye, lad. Rat as well screamed from the public gallery, along with cheers from many friends and family of Elle Edwards. Of course, they have had to sit through not just the last 6 months since her passing, but the 3.5 weeks to 4 weeks of this trial, reliving all that evidence, which has actually been played out quite clearly in front of their eyes, hearing those 12 gunshots that were fired into the crowd of people, seeing Connor Chapman give evidence during this trial as well, and lying about what he did that night. It would have been incredibly difficult for that family, but now there is a huge sigh of relief, not just after yesterday because he was convicted for murder, but today he will be at least 71 years old before the man who was responsible for the murder of 26-year-old Elle Edwards will be released. There's no doubt that this family will be breathing a huge sigh of relief today, Merseyside police as well, and Connor Chapman will be spending a very, very long time behind bars for his murder of the 26-year-old beautician on Christmas Eve last year.
Yeah, absolutely. And Isabel, as you said there, Connor Chapman will be in his 70s before he even gets a chance of release from prison. It's interesting there, you were talking about the role of Tim Edwards, and he has taken, whereas we haven't seen Gaynor, Ellie's mum, in court, we have seen and heard a lot of Tim Edwards. He seems to have gone through a lot, a journey himself, and sort of been to an extent, happy to play that out in a public setting. I just wonder what you think about whether this is something he will take up in the future, perhaps as, you know, make it his cause, perhaps, against gun and gang violence in his community, in Merseyside.
Look, you know, I've been speaking to Tim almost since day one of this whole case. We met a couple of days after it was revealed that it was his daughter who was killed on Christmas Eve. We interviewed him in early January as well. He said at that time he would make it his commitment to make sure that Ellie's name does not go down and forgotten. He will make sure that it is her name that is taken forward to help tackle these kind of issues, particularly across Merseyside. But you're right, Ellie's mum hasn't really been seen. She was seen at the funeral of Elle Edwards, but she hasn't really spoken out. And actually, there were some words written by her that were read out inside the court. She said that I want to know why you have done this, speaking directly to Connor Chapman. What drove you to do this to my daughter, she asked. She also said, since she's been gone, I've never been the same. I still expect her to come home. Since she's gone, my health has deteriorated. She added that we can't ask for more of our children. They've all turned out well and have done us proud. Ellie was not afraid of a challenge, she said. Just as her life was cut short, she was reaching her peak and the happiest I'd ever seen her. She was positive about the future. So there were some words from Elle Edwards' mum in a victim impact statement that were read out by the prosecution lawyer, Nigel Powers, KC. But those words from her brother as well, words from her father, words from her grandmother were incredibly emotional. That court was packed with Ellie's family and friends, and there were tears throughout the whole time those victim impact statements were being read. As you can imagine as well, her brother really poignant in saying that he remembers just messaging Ellie just a couple of hours before she was at the Lighthouse Inn, saying that what's the plan for tomorrow, what's the plan for Christmas Day, because she was supposed to cook Christmas dinner. Usually her dad cooks, but it was her turn that year to cook Christmas dinner. He said that we loved each other so much growing up as teenagers. We loved each other and we were always on the same path. He spoke about as well how he saw her lying in the mortuary when he found out that it was Elle Edwards who had sadly been murdered on Christmas Eve. He said he felt numb. He said he remembers looking at her and seeing the patches above her right eye, clearly where the bullets had been, and he says that's a memory that he will simply never ever forget. He said we've lost everything and we carry on as best as we can, and he said directly to Elle Edwards, I love you, I miss you, and I'll cherish the 26 years we had together. What's important to know is Connor Chapman was sat right there. He came to court to listen to his sentence, and he listened to those victim impact statements. But there was nothing from him in terms of remorse. He kept a very simple, deadpan face. There was no remorse. There was no acknowledgement of regret for what he had done. And the whole time, Tim Edwards, Ellie's father, was looking directly at him, which he has done throughout this trial, particularly when the jury was shown the CCTV of the moment Connor Chapman pulled the trigger and fired those 12 shots into a crowd of people. Tim Edwards looking directly at the man who was responsible for murdering his daughter. He told me that he was looking to see if there was any remorse, if there was any regret from this man, and he said that there simply wasn't. But clearly a huge sentence, one of the largest given for murder in this country. Connor Chapman, a 23-year-old man, has today been given a life sentence, and he will have to serve a minimum of 48 years for murdering Elle Edwards on Christmas Eve last year.
And Inzamam, if for those people who are joining us now here on Sky News, just to remind you that we are hearing there of the sentencing of Connor Chapman for the murder of Elle Edwards on Christmas Eve of last year in Merseyside. He will serve 3 life sentences concurrently, and he will have a minimum term of 48 years. His accomplice, Thomas Waring, will spend at least 9 years in prison. In response to the sentencing that took place within the last hour or so, we heard from the detective superintendent from Merseyside Police, who was in charge of that investigation, Paul Grounds. Let's have a listen to what he said.
Connor Chapman has today been jailed for life for the senseless and tragic murder of Elle Edwards in Wirral on Christmas Eve last year. Elle was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her who was simply enjoying a night out in a pub with her family and friends. The cowardly actions of Chapman on that night, firing at his intended targets whilst they were stood outside in a crowd, shows the arrogance and contempt that he had for everybody else. As a result of his reckless actions, Elle had her life tragically cut short. Her family and friends and everyone who knew her have been left devastated by their loss. Today, Chapman is behind bars where he rightly belongs and where he will now spend a considerable period of his adult life. His co-accused, Thomas Waring, has also been brought to justice. No sentence, however long, can change what Chapman did, but I hope that knowing he has been brought to justice and is off our streets brings some small amount of comfort. I hope that it serves as a deterrent to anybody considering picking up or using a gun. I would like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to Ellie's family, who throughout the whole investigation and the trial have remained dignified and composed despite being forced to relive the horrific events of Christmas Eve. And I hope that they can now start to properly grieve their loss. I would like to thank the Crown Prosecution Service, Adam Clark, and then in particular Nigel Powers, King's Counsel, and Katie Appleton for the successful prosecution of the case. I would also like to thank all officers and staff from across all strands of Merseyside Police who were involved in this case. From day one, their commitment, dedication and hard work has been key to the investigation and has allowed us to successfully prosecute Chapman and Wirral and get the justice for Ellie's family. Thank you.
I'd like to just echo what Paul said, really, that the amount of people involved in this investigation from day one, literally from the minute it happened, has been remarkable, and they did not give up. They were relentless in achieving the goal, which was to get justice for Ellie and catch the killer. Thankfully now he's got 48 years and hopefully he never sees Christmas again. If I'm lucky enough to still be around for a long time, yeah, I would do my best to make sure he never comes out of jail. And I know there's a lot of people who've been affected by this, and that includes the whole family behind me. And it needs to be, things need to change, and we've made a start with that. And I think for 48 years, if you think of picking up a gun now, you should think twice about it. And I'd like to thank, as again, Merseyside Police, the whole family behind me. We've sat here for 4 weeks and had to go through this, something that we'll never forget. But it was all done for Ellie, and we achieved that today. Thank you.
Tim Edwards, the father of Elle Edwards, speaking there in response to the sentencing of Elle Edwards' murderer for 3 life sentences, serving at least 48 years in prison. We have had a reaction to that sentencing from the local MP, Angela Eagle, Labour MP for Wallasey. She says this afternoon, justice has been served. My thoughts continue to be with Elle Edwards' family and loved ones. I hope today will bring them some comfort, though it's nothing compared to the hell they've experienced since her death. We cannot allow gangland violence and cowardly, cold-blooded murder to prevail on the Wirral. It is vital our community is protected from violence and that those who perpetrate such crimes face the consequences of their life-destroying behaviour, as Connor Chapman has. That there, the tweet from local MP Angela Eagle. Let's go straight back to Inzamam Rashid, who's at Liverpool Crown Court. And we heard that from Angela Eagle there, this notion, which we've heard again from Elle Edwards' father and from the superintendent, deterrence, that hopefully this 48-year, well, more than 48 years in prison will act as a deterrent for those in Merseyside looking to pick up a gun. But, of course, this isn't the first incidental death from gang violence in the region. Do you think it is going to be enough of a deterrent?
I think that really is the big question. Merseyside Police will certainly hope that it is, but they thought that the killing of Rhys Jones back in the early 2000s, 2007, I think it was, that they were hoping that that would set a precedent for gang violence across this region. It didn't. We saw last year 5 deaths, 5 murders from gunshot wounds. Of course, as most of us remember, 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, who was killed by Thomas Cashman. Thomas Cashman was given a sentence of 42 years. But today, and I think quite surprisingly as well, the judge went above that, 48 years. He said, I'm satisfied you're a hugely dangerous man. We've all watched the CCTV and the sound recording of that shooting. You had no thought of anyone else all that at least innocent people, you simply did not care. Connor Chapman given a whole life sentence with a minimum of 48 years for the murder of Elle Edwards.
Yeah, and certainly questions for the community, questions for policing, questions culturally as to how to solve that epidemic of gang warfare in Merseyside after the sentencing of the murderer of Elle Edwards' killer to life in prison with at least 48 years to be served in prison. We'll be back after the break.